Hey guys, tonight we are stepping away from the usual hustle and bustle, far, far away, to a place where time moves differently, measured not in minutes and hours, but in the crash of waves and the slow sweep of a colossal beam of light. We're settling into the quiet and sometimes profoundly lonely routine of a 19th century lighthouse keeper. Imagine yourself on a heaving, small boat, the spray cold on your face, approaching a stark stone tower that rises from a craggy, windswept island, or perhaps clings precariously to a remote headland. This isn't a charming weekend getaway with Wi-Fi and a well-stocked fridge. This is your new reality, a world of oil lamps, polishing brass, and the unending, watchful vigil over the sea. Honestly, with the damp, the isolation, and the distinct lack of artisan sourdough delivery, you probably wouldn't last a week. I know I'd be bartering my spare kidney for a decent cup of coffee and a conversation that didn't involve goals by day 3. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really does help the channel find other weary souls in need of some gently narrated historical slumber. And while you're at it, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far these little historical jaunts travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The groan of the rowlocks is the first sound that truly breaks the rhythm of the waves, a rough wooden sigh that signals your approach. You've been watching the tower grow for the past hour, a gray finger pointing accusingly at a sky that can't seem to decide between moody slate and a watery, hopeful blue. It stands implacable, a testament to human stubbornness against the relentless power of nature. This particular model, let's say, is a classic wave-swept tower, meaning it's built offshore on a rock that gets thoroughly and often violently acquainted with the sea. These were marvels of 19th century engineering, often constructed from massive, interlocking granite blocks designed to withstand hurricane-force winds and waves that could casually toss boulders around like pebbles. Your predecessor, a man whose face was as weathered as the stone he tended, gives a curt nod as your small boat, expertly handled by the tender crew, scrapes against the landing stage. You clamber out, your legs a little unsteady from the sea voyage, and the first thing that hits you is the sheer, unyielding solidity of it all. The air smells sharply of salt, damp stone, and something else. A faint metallic tang mixed with old oil, perhaps. It's not unpleasant, just elemental. You're handed a heavy iron key, large enough to belong to a medieval dungeon, which it sort of is, if dungeons came with a really important job and a spectacular, if somewhat repetitive view. The boat crew, with practiced efficiency, begins unloading your meager possessions, a trunk of clothes, a box of books, mostly practical manuals, and perhaps a well-thumbed volume of poetry, and your initial allotment of provisions. There's no lingering, no tearful goodbyes. This is a handover, a changing of the guard, done with the brisk economy of men who understand the sea and its demands. As you step through the thick, iron-bound door at the base of the tower, the sound of the outside world, the wind, the waves, the cries of gulls, is suddenly muffled, replaced by an echoing chill. The interior is circular, of course, and the stone walls curve away from you, seeming to absorb what little light filters in from the narrow, deeply recessed windows. You can already feel the dampness seeping into your bones, a constant companion in these places. It's a dampness that will try to colonize your clothes, your bedding, your very spirit if you let it. Many keepers swore by flannel everything, layers upon layers, to try and keep the chill at bay. Your living quarters are, to put it mildly, Spartan. Perhaps a small cast iron stove for heating and cooking, a narrow bunk built into the curve of the wall, a simple table and chair. There's a distinct lack of what we might call personal touches, unless you count the intricate patterns of saltpeter blooming on the lower stonework. Some lighthouses, especially the larger land-based ones, might have had slightly more extensive quarters, occasionally even allowing for a keeper's family. But for a wave-swept tower like this one, space is at an absolute premium. Every inch is functional. Historians still argue whether the psychological toll of such profound isolation was adequately understood or considered by the authorities who assigned these posts. Was it seen as a necessary hardship for a vital job? Or was there a certain type of person actively sought for these roles, someone already inclined to solitude? Pushing open the heavy, weather-sealed door, you step into the lantern room itself. And it takes your breath away, even if you've seen diagrams, even if you were expecting it. This is a chamber of glass and brass, a crystalline cage designed to magnify and project. The great lamp assembly sits at its heart, a monument of polished metal and intricate pipework. It might be an argand lamp, a marvel of its time, with a circular wick and a glass chimney designed to improve airflow and create a brighter, steadier flame. Or, if it's a larger station, it could be a multi-wick burner, a collection of concentric wicks, each needing individual attention. The sheer scale of it is impressive. This isn't your bedside table lamp. This is an industrial-grade illumination device, built to throw its beam for miles across a turbulent sea. Your first task is to check and fill the oil reservoir. This might involve a bit of pumping or carefully pouring from a heavy can, ensuring no spillage and no air bubbles in the fuel lines. Precision is key. Then, the wicks. They must be perfectly trimmed. A fraction too high, and the lamp will smoke, sooting up the precious lens and diminishing the light. A fraction too low, and the flame will be weak and ineffective. You use specialized scissors, long and slender, to achieve a perfectly even edge. This is an art form in itself, something that separates an experienced keeper from a novice. Some keepers had their own idiosyncratic wick trimming techniques, little trade secrets passed down or discovered through trial and error. One rather quirky but vital tool for some older lamp systems was a small pointed stick, often made of bone or hardwood, used to gently clear any carbon deposits from the wick tubes without damaging the delicate fabric of the wick itself. A sort of 19th century Q-tip for giants. Once the wicks are prepared, you meticulously clean the lamp's glass chimney, ensuring it's free of any dust or soot from the previous night's burning. Any imperfection here will diffuse or obstruct the light. You inspect the clockwork mechanism if your lighthouse has a rotating beam, a system of weights and gears that will slowly turn the entire lens assembly, or sometimes just the lamp within a fixed lens, creating its unique flashing signature that ships use for identification. Winding this mechanism is another of your crucial daily tasks, like winding a giant life-saving grandfather clock. The sky outside is now a deep, velvety indigo, the first stars pricking through. The sea is a dark, restless mass below. It's time. With a long taper, you reach in, your hand steady despite the immensity of the moment. You touch the flame to the first wick, then the next, and the next. If it's a multiple wick system, there's a soft whoosh as each one catches, a small, hesitant yellow flower of light blooming in the heart of the great machine. You adjust them carefully, watching the flames grow, merge, and stabilize into a single, brilliant, unwavering pillar of light. The transformation is immediate and profound. The lantern room, moments before a shadowy space of gleaming metal, is now filled with a warm, intense radiance. Historians still debate the precise candle power achieved by these early oil lamps compared to later technologies, but to anyone out on that dark sea, it was a star of hope. You step back for a moment, letting your eyes adjust, feeling the gentle warmth emanating from the lamp. It's alive, and with its awakening, your vigil truly begins. Your lonely stone tower now has a purpose, a voice that speaks in the universal language of light, a silent promise of guidance and safety to those navigating the dark waters. The simple act of lighting this lamp connects you to a long chain of keepers before you, and to the countless souls who will look for this light in the nights to come. It's a heavy thought, but also a strangely comforting one. Your isolation has a meaning. You are the guardian of the flame. Now, to just keep it that way for the next 12 hours or so, easy peasy. The night passes in a series of slow, measured beats. You don't sleep soundly, not at first. You're attuned to the lamp, its steady burning a presence as real as any companion. Perhaps you doze fitfully in a chair kept in the lantern room for this purpose, or on a small cot in the service room below. Your senses always half awake, listening for any change in the flame's rhythm, any sputter or flicker that might signal trouble. You make regular checks, climbing back into the warm, radiant glow of the lantern room, your shadow thrown huge and dancing against the curved glass. Outside, the world is an inky blackness, the sea a vast, unseen breathing entity. The light sweeps its appointed path, a solitary, reassuring pulse in the immense dark. You might step out onto the narrow gallery that often encircles the lantern room, the wind whipping at your clothes, the salt spray misting your face, just to feel the raw elements and confirm that your beam is cutting cleanly through the night. It's a lonely vigil, yes, but also a strangely powerful one. You are the single point of unwavering vigilance in a sleeping or storm-tossed world. As the first, almost imperceptible hint of gray begins to soften the eastern horizon, a subtle shift occurs. The stars, your distant companions through the night, start to fade, their cold fire paling against the approaching dawn. This is a critical time. Your light, so vital in the darkness, will soon be rendered redundant by the rising sun. You watch the horizon intently, judging the precise moment. There's a specific protocol for extinguishing the lamp. It can't be left to burn oil needlessly in daylight, nor can it be put out too soon, leaving those last pre-dawn voyagers in peril. The timing is a matter of experience, of knowing your particular latitude and the way the light changes with the seasons. When the moment arrives, just as the sun's upper limb prepares to break the surface of the sea in a blaze of orange and gold, you begin the careful process of shutting down the great lamp. It's the reverse of last night's ritual. You reduce the wicks, starving the flames, until, with a final, soft sigh, the light that has battled the darkness for 12 hours surrenders to the day. The sudden absence of its intense glow leaves the lantern room feeling strangely empty. The air cooler. The smell of recently burnt oil is more pronounced now, a residue of the night's labors. And now, as the sun climbs higher, flooding the lantern room with natural light, your next, and arguably one of your most relentless tasks begins: the cleaning. Oh, the cleaning. If you thought your apartment got a bit dusty, imagine this. After a night of burning, a fine film of soot, oil residue, and condensation often coats the inside of the lantern glass and the lamp's own chimney and components. Any grime on the outside of the lantern glass, caked on by salt spray and battered by seabird droppings, a surprisingly persistent problem, also needs to be addressed, though that's a more perilous weather-dependent task for the exterior gallery. For now, it's the interior that demands your unwavering attention. The efficiency of the light, its very ability to pierce the next night's darkness, depends on the absolute, pristine cleanliness of every reflective or transparent surface. You arm yourself with soft cloths, often chamois leather or fine linen, and your polishing agents. In the 19th century, these might include a mixture of whiting, finely powdered chalk, and spirits of wine alcohol, or even just fresh water applied as a paste allowed to dry and then buffed to a brilliant shine. Some keepers develop their own secret recipes, perhaps incorporating a little fine ash, or even, according to some more dubious accounts, a touch of onion juice for extra sparkle on the glass. Historians still argue whether these idiosyncratic cleaning concoctions offered any genuine advantage or were simply part of the ritual and personal pride of the keeper. Whatever your preferred method, it's a slow, painstaking process. First, the lamp's glass chimney, which protected the flame and directed the airflow. It's likely to be the sootiest. You handle it with extreme care. It's delicate and crucial. Then, any other glass components of the lamp itself. After that, you turn your attention to the brass. Oh, the endless brass. The burner assembly, the fuel lines, decorative fittings, the clockwork mechanism housing if you have one. All of it must gleam. Tarnish isn't just unsightly. On moving parts, it can be a precursor to corrosion and malfunction. So you rub and you polish, your breath misting in the cool morning air. The only sounds the rhythmic squeak of cloth on metal and glass, and the ever-present sea outside. It's a meditative task in a way. It has to be, or you'd go mad from the repetition. You might even find yourself humming a sea shanty, the kind of tune that's more about rhythm for work than actual musical talent. Heaven forbid anyone actually hear you. The gulls are critical enough. Then there's the inside of the lantern room windows themselves, those huge panes of thick, curved glass that protect the lamp assembly from the elements. Each one must be spotless. You'll use a small ladder or steps to reach the upper portions, stretching and wiping, inspecting for any streaks or smears from every conceivable angle. It's like being a window cleaner for a giant, exceptionally grumpy cyclops who demands perfection. One mainstream historical fact is the sheer amount of glass involved in these lantern rooms. Some Fresnel lenses alone contained hundreds of precisely ground prisms, and the lantern enclosure itself was a significant feat of glazing engineering, designed to withstand incredible wind pressure and the impact of waves or large birds. Even without a full Fresnel yet, the amount of glass is daunting. As you work, the sun climbs, and the interior of the lantern room can become surprisingly warm, even hot, like a greenhouse. The polished brass throws back dazzling reflections. Your arms ache, your fingers are smudged, but slowly, painstakingly, the sparkle returns. The glass becomes invisible again, a perfect conduit for the light it will soon unleash. The brass shines with a deep, golden luster, reflecting your own tired but determined face. This isn't just about cleanliness, it's about respect for the equipment, for the light, and for the lives that depend on it. It's a daily battle against encroaching entropy, against the salt and the soot and the slow decay that the sea air tries to impose on everything. And for today at least, you are winning. For a few brief hours, it will be perfect, a dazzling jewel waiting for the dusk. With the lantern room gleaming like the inside of a giant, well-polished Fabergé egg. If Fabergé had a penchant for utilitarian maritime safety devices, you might think you'd earned a bit of a break. Perhaps a nice sit-down with a cup of lukewarm, thrice-boiled tea and a contemplative stare at a particularly interesting patch of damp on the wall. And you'd be partially right. The most intense, back-straining cleaning is done. But the lamp, that demanding diva, isn't finished with you yet. Its appetite for fuel is considerable, and its various components require constant, preemptive care throughout the day. This isn't a set-it-and-forget-it kind of operation, more like a fuss over it constantly, or people might sail into rocks kind of deal. Your attention now turns to the lifeblood of the light, the oil, somewhere in the lower levels of the tower, or perhaps in a dedicated storage shed if your station is land-based and slightly more luxurious. Luxury being a relative term here, possibly meaning you have two different kinds of hardtack, are the main oil casks or tanks. These hold the bulk supply, your precious reserve against the long nights and potentially delayed supply runs. You need to check the levels in the lamp's service tank, usually located in the service room or even within the lantern room itself, and replenish it as needed. This might involve the rather laborious process of hand pumping the oil up from the main storage, or carefully decanting it from smaller, more manageable barrels into a carrying container, then hauling it up those endless spiral stairs. You'd want to avoid any spills, of course. Oil is messy, a slipping hazard on stone steps, and a precious, rationed commodity. Each drop wasted is a drop less light for the sea. You can imagine the paperwork if you accidentally turned the pristine lantern room into an oil slick. Item: one lighthouse keeper, slightly used, very clumsy. While handling the oil, you're also vigilant for any impurities. Water condensation, sediment, a rogue sea beetle that decided your oil cask looked like a five-star resort. Anything that could clog the fuel lines or cause the lamp to sputter and fail. Some keepers, as a quirky but vital practice, would meticulously filter their oil through fine muslin or layers of felt before it went into the service tank, especially if the main storage was in a damp or exposed location. It was an extra tedious step, but one that could prevent a catastrophic lamp failure on a stormy night. Think of it as a 19th century Brita filter, but instead of clean drinking water, you get slightly less contaminated flammable liquid. Progress. Then there are the wicks. You've already trimmed the ones in use, but a good keeper always has spares ready, and often you'd be preparing a batch for the coming days or weeks. This wasn't just a matter of cutting lengths of woven cotton. Depending on the lamp type and the oil being used, wicks might need to be boiled to remove impurities, dried carefully, or even treated with specific solutions. A secret art passed from keeper to keeper to ensure optimal capillary action and a clean, steady flame. You handle the soft, pliable material, perhaps rolling new wicks to the correct density or carefully stitching multiple strands together for the larger, more complex burner assemblies. It's quiet, focused work, the kind that allows your mind to drift a little, though never too far from the task at hand. Your hands, already calloused from cleaning and hauling, become intimately familiar with the texture of these vital threads. And let's not forget the clockwork if your lighthouse has a revolving light. And by the mid to late 19th century, many did, as a fixed light could be mistaken for a ship at anchor. These mechanisms, a beautiful symphony of brass gears, escapements, and heavy weights, were essentially oversized grandfather clocks. The mainstream historical fact here is that these clockwork systems were crucial for giving each lighthouse its unique characteristic, the specific pattern of flashes and eclipses that allowed mariners to identify it and pinpoint their position. To achieve this, a heavy weight, sometimes descending many stories down a central shaft in the tower, had to be wound back up to the top, usually once or twice a day. This was pure physical labor. You'd be cranking a large handle, feeling the resistance of the gears, hearing the satisfying clunks and clicks as the great weight slowly ascended, ready to power the lamp's rotation for another cycle. No gym membership needed with this career choice. The lighthouse itself was your personal, multi-story resistance trainer. Historians still engage in scholarly debate regarding the precise level of mechanical skill required of lighthouse keepers. While some systems were robust, others could be temperamental, and a keeper with a knack for diagnosing and performing minor repairs on these intricate clockwork systems or the lamp burners themselves was invaluable, especially given their isolation from immediate expert help. Instructions were provided, of course, often in detailed manuals filled with complex diagrams that probably looked like abstract art to the less mechanically inclined. If cogwheel A makes a funny grinding noise against pinion B, try percussive maintenance with spanner C, or just pray. Okay, maybe not that last part, but you get the idea. You check the lubrication of the gears, ensure the cables for the weights are running freely, and listen for any unusual sounds. A grating, a squeak, anything that might indicate wear or impending trouble. It's preventative maintenance at its most critical. A failure in the clockwork meant the light might stop rotating, its signature lost, potentially confusing mariners, or worse, making the light appear as a constant, unidentifiable glow. So, you tend to it with the same care you afford the lamp itself, this silent, metallic heart that gives your light its voice, its rhythm. Every task, from topping up the oil to gently coaxing a gear, is part of the day's quiet, essential routine, a constant preparation for the night to come. It's a slow, deliberate dance with mechanics and fuel, ensuring that when darkness falls again, your sentinel will be ready to perform its solitary, life-saving duty without a hitch. The day is settled into its quiet rhythm of meticulous care. You've checked the oil, prepared wicks until your fingers are stained and slightly sticky, and ensured the clockwork mechanism is purring like a well-fed, if somewhat oversized, brass kitten. You might even be allowing yourself a moment of quiet contemplation, perhaps gazing out at the seemingly endless expanse of sea, which today is a relatively calm, sun-dappled blue. It's almost peaceful. Almost. Because the sea, as you're learning, is a fickle beast, and it has more than one way to obscure the path of unwary mariners. You notice it first as a subtle blurring on the horizon, a softness where sharp lines used to be. Then, a creeping whiteness, like a vast, silent entity exhaling a damp breath over the world. Fog. It rolls in with an unnerving stealth, swallowing the distant headlands. Then, the closer waves, until finally, your tower itself is an island in a sea of opaque, grayish-white fluff. The transformation is swift and total. One moment you can see for miles. The next, your entire world has shrunk to a few dozen feet around the base of your stone sentinel. The sun becomes a pale, ghostly disk, then disappears entirely. A peculiar silence descends, the usual sounds of the waves and wind muffled, insulated by the thick, wet blanket. It's like the world has been wrapped in damp cotton wool. And with the arrival of the fog, a new and arguably more exhausting phase of your duties begins. Your beautiful, powerful light, so meticulously prepared, is now all but useless, its beam swallowed by the cloying mist a short distance from the lantern glass. It's time to make some noise. A lot of noise. Many 19th-century lighthouses were equipped with some form of fog signal, and the mainstream historical fact here is the sheer variety and often rudimentary nature of these early auditory warnings. Before the advent of powerful, automated diaphones or steam-driven sirens, keepers relied on methods that were often brutally laborious. Some stations had massive bells, weighing hundreds of pounds or even tons, which had to be struck by hand with a heavy hammer at precise intervals. Imagine that for hours on end, a one-person, high-stakes, bell-ringing marathon. Others employed small cannons, which, while impressively loud, required reloading and firing, again, on a strict schedule in all weathers. You'd basically be a one-man artillery unit, but instead of fending off pirates, you're just trying to tell someone, hey, big rock here. Your particular station, let's imagine, is equipped with a mechanical foghorn, perhaps a hand-cranked reed horn, or a system where you manually pump bellows to compress air that then blasts through a horn. This is a step up from a cannon, perhaps, in terms of not needing gunpowder, but it's still an exercise in relentless physical exertion. You make your way to the apparatus, often housed in a separate small structure or a specific part of the tower designed to project the sound. The air is thick with moisture now. You can feel it condensing on your face, on your clothes, making everything feel clammy and cold. The horn itself is a formidable-looking contraption of polished brass or copper, a flaring maw aimed out into the unseen. And then the work begins. If it's hand-cranked, you start turning, a heavy, grinding resistance that quickly makes your shoulders and arms burn. If it's bellows-operated, you pump, a rhythmic up and down motion that feels like you're trying to inflate a stubborn, house-sized whale. The goal is to build up enough pressure to unleash a blast of sound that will, hopefully, pierce the fog and warn any nearby vessels. The sound, when it comes, is astounding. A deep, sonorous, almost mournful bellow, or perhaps a higher-pitched, ear-splitting shriek, depending on the mechanism. It's a sound that vibrates through your entire body, rattles your teeth, and seems to shake the very stones of the tower. And you have to do this at precise intervals, perhaps one blast every minute or two blasts every 90 seconds, for as long as the fog persists. This could be hours. This could be days. The sheer, mind-numbing, muscle-screaming monotony of it is hard to comprehend. There's no automation, no button to press, just you, the machine, and the relentless schedule. Your world shrinks to the rhythm of the crank or the pump, the building pressure, the deafening release, and the brief, ringing silence before you must begin again. You can't hear much else over the roar of your own signal. The sea is a muffled secret. Any approaching ships are invisible and silent save for, hopefully, their own fog signals sounding faintly in reply. A ghostly conversation in the blinding whiteness. One rather quirky and perhaps grim tidbit is that some keepers in particularly fog-prone locations were known to develop specific physical ailments, like foghorn shoulder, or even partial deafness, from the repetitive strain and the sheer unrelenting noise. It was just considered part of the job description, like must be okay with profound isolation and the constant threat of drowning. Historians sometimes debate the true effective range and reliability of these earlier manually powered fog signals, especially in very dense pea-soup fogs or against strong winds. While undoubtedly better than nothing, how far could that hand-cranked bellow truly carry a life-saving warning? It's a sobering thought as you toil, your muscles screaming, your ears ringing, the damp fog chilling you to the bone. You just have to trust that your efforts are making a difference, that your rhythmic groans and shrieks are cutting through the opaque curtain. You might try to vary your cranking arm or find a rhythm that's sustainable, but eventually, exhaustion is inevitable. It's you against the silent, indifferent fog, and the fog has a lot more staying power. This isn't the romantic image of the keeper, silhouetted against a glowing lamp. This is the gritty, noisy, exhausting reality of fighting an invisible enemy, with sheer brute force and lung power, or arm power as it were. And as you send another bone-jarring blast out into the impenetrable whiteness, you can only hope someone, somewhere out there, hears it. The fog, as capriciously as it arrived, might begin to thin. Or perhaps, after what feels like an eternity of cranking, pumping, and bellowing into the opaque abyss, the official schedule allows for a brief respite, a rotation if you were lucky enough to have an assistant, a rare luxury in many smaller, more isolated towers. More likely, though, the fog simply decides to lift a little, teasing you with glimpses of a gray, turbulent sea before closing in again. Or it might dissipate entirely, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean and dripping, the sun trying to reassert its authority. Your arms ache, your ears are definitely staging a protest, and the silence, when it finally comes, feels as profound and almost as deafening as the noise that preceded it. Your throat is raw, even if you weren't shouting, just from the tension and the damp recycled air you've been breathing. It's in these moments, after the intense, demanding labor of the fog signal, or at the quiet end of a long night's watch, that the sheer, unadulterated solitude of your existence truly settles in. And with that solitude comes the routine of daily sustenance. Don't imagine a well-stocked pantry with artisanal cheeses and a variety of imported olives. Your culinary landscape is, shall we say, somewhat more restricted. It's time to prepare a meal, an activity that is less about gourmet pleasure and more about functional refueling. You descend from the lantern room or the foghorn station, back to your small living quarters, the air still feeling cool and damp, though perhaps a little less oppressive now that you're not actively wrestling with a noise-making behemoth. Your larder consists primarily of things that can survive a long sea voyage and an even longer stay in a damp stone tower without the benefit of refrigeration. That magical box wouldn't be a common household item for many decades yet, let alone a standard lighthouse fitting. So you're looking at barrels of salted beef or pork, so heavily preserved it could probably survive the apocalypse and still be edible-ish. Sacks of hardtack biscuits, the infamous ship's bread, so durable you could probably use them to patch a hole in the wall, or as a particularly unyielding paperweight, Dried beans, peas, rice, oatmeal, perhaps some tinned meats or fish, a relatively new invention in the 19th century, and a godsend for isolated posts. The mainstream historical fact is that the diet for many lighthouse keepers was incredibly monotonous and heavily reliant on these preserved staples. Fresh fruit and vegetables were a rare treat, entirely dependent on the frequency of the supply tender, or, for the luckiest keepers at land-based stations, what they could grow in a small, wind-battered garden patch. So, what culinary masterpiece are you whipping up today? Perhaps a thrilling stew of salted beef, boiled for hours to try and leach out some of the excessive sodium, combined with a handful of those aforementioned dried beans. The aroma, as it simmers on your small cast iron stove, is robust. It's the smell of survival, not of fine dining. Or maybe it's just hardtack soaked in tea, if you have it, or water to render it slightly less likely to break your teeth, perhaps accompanied by a slice of that tinned mystery meat. You become adept at making the most of very little. One quirky tidbit often shared among maritime historians is the surprising ingenuity some isolated individuals showed in their cooking. Keepers, like sailors on long voyages, sometimes developed unique, if not always universally appealing recipes. You might learn to bake a passable, if dense, form of bread on your stovetop, or discover that a particular combination of dried herbs, if you had any, could make the salted beef marginally less depressing. Some even tried their hand at pickling or preserving any seabird eggs they could safely and legally, depending on the era and location, gather. As you prepare your meal, the only sounds are the ones you make. The clink of a tin cup, the scrape of a knife, the sigh of the stove, and the constant ambient soundtrack of the tower. The wind whistling around the stonework, the distant rhythmic crash of waves, the occasional creak or groan from the tower itself as it settles or responds to the elements. It's like living inside a giant, very stoic musical instrument that only knows a few mournful notes. Your dinner companions are the flickering shadows cast by your lamp, if it's evening, or the pale light filtering through the narrow window. The conversation is, needless to say, a bit one-sided. You might find yourself talking to the stove, or a particularly friendly-looking piece of driftwood you found, or perhaps just narrating your actions aloud, a common coping mechanism in profound isolation. Well, Mr. Beef, into the pot you go. Try not to be too aggressively salty today, there's a good chap. You eat at your small, sturdy table, the food undeniably plain, but warm and filling. It does the job. There's no lingering over courses, no delicate savoring of flavors. This is fuel. While you eat, you might look out the window if the weather permits, at the endless gray or blue, the horizon a stark line between sea and sky. There's a certain stark beauty to it, a raw, untamed magnificence that few people ever get to witness with such intimacy. But there's also an overwhelming sense of being very, very small and very, very alone in that magnificence. Historians still debate the psychological impact of this prolonged dietary monotony, coupled with extreme social isolation on lighthouse keepers. Did the lack of variety and fresh nutrients contribute to bouts of melancholy, or melancholia, as it was often termed? Or were keepers generally a self-selected group already resilient to such pressures? After the meal, cleaning up is a simple affair. There are no piles of dishes, no dishwasher to load. Another century or so for that luxury mate. You wash your few utensils in a small basin, the water likely cold and also hauled by hand. Every action is deliberate, conserving resources, maintaining the small pocket of order you've carved out in this wild place. The solitude stretches before you and after you, an ocean of quiet hours. And in that quiet, with a belly full of basic sustenance, you prepare for the next round of duties, or perhaps, if you're truly fortunate, a few hours of precious, undisturbed sleep before the lamp or the foghorn calls you once more. The simple, solitary meal is done, the few dishes cleaned and stowed. You might be settling into a period of relative quiet, perhaps mending some clothing by the dim light filtering through the narrow window, or making an entry in your logbook. The wind outside maintains its usual sighing conversation with the stone, a constant but familiar presence. But then, you notice a change. The sigh is deepening, taking on a more guttural, mournful tone. The light outside, which might have been a pale afternoon gray, seems to be dimming prematurely, the sky taking on a bruised, yellowish or greenish hue that old sailors and lighthouse keepers learn to distrust. If you have a barometer, a precious instrument in this line of work, you'd see the needle has taken a determined dive. The sea, too, is transforming, its surface no longer just choppy, but developing a more organized, powerful swell, the waves beginning to march in long, ominous ranks towards your lonely outpost. A storm is brewing, and not just a bit of a blow, but something that feels altogether more serious. There's a particular tension in the air before a major gale, a kind of charged stillness even as the wind begins to flex its muscles. You start your preparations. Every shutter on the lower windows must be securely fastened. Any loose items on the outside gallery, if you have one and dared to leave anything there, must be brought in or tied down with an almost religious fervor. You check the seals on the main door, the lantern room access, anywhere the sea might try to force an entry, because it will try. Oh, it will definitely try. This isn't a batten down the hatches, old boy sort of quaint movie scene. This is a grim, methodical process of fortifying your tiny island of stone against the rage of the ocean. You're like a medieval knight preparing for a siege, except your enemy is a 1,000-mile-wide tantrum of wind and water. The mainstream historical fact here is the incredible engineering that went into these towers. Many, especially those wave-swept marvels like the Eddystone or Bell Rock lighthouses, were constructed with interlocking granite blocks, sometimes dovetailed together, designed to distribute the force of the waves and create an almost monolithic structure. Their curved, tapering profiles were also designed to offer less resistance to the wind and allow waves to sweep up and over, rather than crashing with their full, destructive force head-on. But even the best engineering is tested by the full fury of an Atlantic or Pacific gale. As dusk approaches, far earlier than usual due to the menacing cloud cover, you ascend to light the great lamp. Tonight, its beam will be more vital than ever, a desperate spear of light trying to penetrate the driving rain and spray. The wind is a physical force now, hammering at the lantern glass, making the whole structure hum and occasionally groan, like a ship in heavy seas. And then the real storm hits. It's an assault on all senses. The sound is an overwhelming, deafening cacophony. The shriek of the wind, a noise so intense it feels like it's trying to peel the air from your eardrums. The relentless, percussive roar of giant waves exploding against the base of the tower, sending tremors right up through the stone into the soles of your boots. Rain and spray lash the lantern glass with such ferocity, it's like being inside a colossal, out-of-control car wash. You can barely see out, and what you can glimpse is a maelstrom of churning, white-capped water, a world gone mad. Inside the tower, you are a prisoner of the storm. The very stone beneath your feet seems to vibrate. Some taller towers were known to sway, just slightly, in the most extreme gusts. A terrifying sensation for the keeper, though engineers would argue it was a sign of the structure's resilience, its ability to flex rather than break. Historians still debate just how much these towers actually moved, and whether keepers perceived this as a sign of imminent doom or a strange, unsettling dance with the elements. You might find yourself wedging your chair against a wall to stop it sliding, or bracing yourself as a particularly violent gust makes the tower shudder. Sleep is out of the question. Your entire being is focused on the light. Is it still burning steadily? Is the clockwork mechanism for rotation, if you have one, still functioning amidst these vibrations? You make frequent perilous checks, clinging to handholds, your world a rocking, roaring cage of glass and iron high above a furious sea. Water might begin to weep through tiny, previously unnoticed cracks in the stonework, or seep under the lantern room door despite your best efforts. The dampness becomes even more pervasive, the chill more biting. One quirky, though perhaps understandable tidbit is that some keepers developed almost superstitious rituals during severe storms, perhaps always wearing a particular item of clothing, or reciting certain phrases, or avoiding looking directly at the most monstrous waves. Anything to feel a sliver of control in a situation where you are utterly at the mercy of nature's brutal power. You wouldn't be brewing a cup of tea during this. You'd be lucky if you could keep a candle lit in your living quarters, let alone a fire in the stove. Hours pass in this terrifying, exhilarating, and exhausting state. The waves hitting the tower can be immense. In some exposed lighthouses, green water, solid waves, not just spray, has been known to crash right over the top of the lantern, a truly awe-inspiring and terrifying sight for any keeper within. You hear things, strange groans and shrieks from the wind, the impact of debris torn from who knows where slamming into the tower. Your imagination, already perhaps a little overactive from the solitude, can run wild. Is that the sound of stone grinding? Is the foundation secure? These are thoughts you try to push away. You focus on your duty, the light. The light must burn. It's your sole purpose, your anchor in this chaos. It's a tiny pinprick of human defiance against the overwhelming, primordial rage of the storm. And as you stand your watch, a solitary figure in a shaking stone tower, you are a testament to steadfastness, to the quiet, stubborn courage of those who keep the lights burning. The storm, like all furies, eventually exhausts itself. The wind, though still strong, loses its demonic shriek, softening to a mournful howl, then a blustery sigh. The rain subsides, replaced by intermittent squalls. The mountainous waves gradually diminish, their roars fading to a still powerful, but less threatening, grumble against the base of your tower. Dawn, if the tempest has raged through the night, reveals a sea scoured clean, perhaps littered with debris, under a sky slowly clearing to a bruised but hopeful blue. You and your stone sentinel have survived. There's an immense bone-weary relief, but also a new layer of grime and salt caked everywhere, and probably a fresh list of minor damages to assess and repair when conditions allow. The lamp, your steadfast companion through the ordeal, is extinguished with the rising sun, its nightly duty done. After the immediate post-storm checks, ensuring the lantern glass is intact, a miracle in itself sometimes, the mechanisms are still operational, and no critical damage has been sustained by the tower's structure. A different kind of challenge reasserts itself. The quiet. The vast, echoing, unending quiet, punctuated only by the now subdued voice of the sea and the wind. The adrenaline subsides, leaving a hollow feeling, and the sheer, undiluted isolation of your post can feel more acute than ever. This is when the unending hours truly make their presence felt. Your official duties, cleaning, fueling, winding, observing, fill a significant portion of your day, but there are still long stretches where you are left entirely to your own devices. And in a 19th century lighthouse, devices for entertainment are somewhat thin on the ground. There's no Wi-Fi, no streaming services, no doom-scrolling social media to numb the passage of time. You can't just Netflix and chill when the chill is a permanent state of damp and your primary entertainment option is watching barnacles grow. So, how do you pass these hours, keeper? How do you keep the insidious creep of cabin fever or tower fever, in this case, at bay? You turn to small, simple, and often repetitive tasks and hobbies. Mending becomes a significant occupation. Your clothes, constantly exposed to salt air and rough wear, are always in need of attention. You sit by the narrow window during daylight hours, or closer to your small oil lamp in the evenings, meticulously darning socks that seem to develop holes with a vengeance, patching tears in your sturdy woolen trousers, or restitching a button on your heavy keeper's jacket. It's not glamorous work, but it's necessary, and the rhythmic passage of needle and thread can be strangely soothing, a small act of order and preservation in a world that tends towards chaos and decay. You might even become quite adept at it, your calloused fingers surprisingly nimble. Your fashion statement out here is less runway chic and more aggressively darned. Reading, if you are literate and have access to books, is a precious escape. The mainstream historical fact is that while official lighthouse service libraries were sometimes provided, they were often limited, consisting mainly of technical manuals, nautical almanacs, religious texts, the Bible was a common companion, and perhaps a few volumes of edifying, if not wildly exciting, literature. If a previous keeper left behind a tattered novel, or if the supply tender occasionally brought an old magazine, it was treasured, read and reread until the pages were soft and the stories memorized. You pore over the print, your lips perhaps moving silently with the words, transported for a brief time to other worlds, other lives, far from the ceaseless wind and waves. If books are scarce, you might turn to writing. Keeping the official logbook is a duty, as we'll discuss, but some keepers maintained personal journals, private chronicles of their thoughts, observations, and the minutiae of their isolated existence. Letter writing, too, was a vital link to the outside world, though the opportunities to send and receive mail were infrequent, tied to the unpredictable schedule of the supply tender. Each letter written was a carefully crafted message in a bottle, sent out with hope. And then there are the more hands-on hobbies. Whittling was a common pastime for men in isolated situations, with a sharp knife and a piece of driftwood salvaged from the shore, if your station had any accessible shoreline, or even a spare piece of firewood. You could carve small figures, tools, or simply create a pile of satisfyingly uniform wood shavings. It's an activity that occupies the hands and allows the mind to wander. Some keepers, particularly those with a maritime background, might have practiced scrimshaw if they could get hold of whalebone or teeth, though this became less common as the 19th century progressed and whaling practices changed. One rather quirky tidbit is that some keepers became surprisingly skilled amateur naturalists. Confined to their small domains, they had ample opportunity to observe the local flora and fauna. They might meticulously document bird migrations, the behavior of seals or other marine mammals, the types of seaweed washed ashore after a storm, or even sketch the intricate patterns of shells. These amateur observations sometimes even contributed to broader scientific understanding. Historians still find fascinating, detailed notes on natural phenomena tucked away in old lighthouse logbooks, showing a keen and curious mind at work. There's also the endless task of simply maintaining your small living space to a habitable standard beyond the official duties for the light itself. Keeping the stove clean, scrubbing the salt grime from the floor, ensuring your meager food supplies are protected from damp and pests. These aren't hobbies, perhaps, but they fill the time and provide a sense of purpose. Some keepers might even have tried to cultivate a tiny patch of something green if they had access to a bit of soil and shelter. A few hardy herbs, perhaps, a desperate attempt to bring a touch of life and freshness to their stark environment. Scholarly debate sometimes touches upon the mental fortitude required for such prolonged periods with minimal external stimulation. Were some keepers more naturally inclined to introversion and self-sufficiency, or did the environment itself mold them, forcing them to find resources within themselves they never knew they possessed? The silence of these off-duty hours can be a comfort, or it can press in on you. You learn to live with your own thoughts for better or worse. You might find yourself singing old songs, reciting poetry from memory, or simply staring out at the sea for long periods, lost in reverie. These are the hours that truly define the lonely routine. Not the moments of high drama or focused work, but the long, quiet stretches in between where you are simply there, alone with the sea, the sky, and the ticking passage of unending time. The days and weeks can blur into a long, undifferentiated stretch of gray sea, gray sky, routine chores, and the quiet companionship of your own thoughts. You've mended every sock you own, twice. You know the patterns of the lichen on the north-facing stones by heart. You've even considered starting a stimulating conversation with that one particularly opinionated seagull about the socioeconomic impact of guano, but you suspect he's a staunch conservative. It's in this deep well of solitude, when the world feels like it has shrunk to the precise diameter of your stone tower, that the anticipation of the supply tender's visit begins to build. It's not just a date on a calendar, if you even have one that's remotely accurate. It's a beacon of hope, a tangible link to the bustling, noisy human world you've almost forgotten. You find yourself scanning the horizon more frequently, your eyes searching for that telltale smudge of smoke from a steamer, or the distant, hopeful triangle of a sail. Every indistinct shape on the water becomes a potential candidate, only to resolve itself into a frustratingly empty patch of sea or a pod of disinterested dolphins who, anoraks aside, probably have a better social life than you do right now. The frequency of these visits varied enormously. For some easily accessible coastal stations, it might be relatively regular, perhaps monthly. But for remote, wave-swept towers like yours, it could be many months between sightings, entirely at the mercy of weather, tides, and the overburdened schedule of the lighthouse service. The mainstream historical fact is that these lighthouse tenders were the unsung heroes of maritime safety, not only delivering the vital oil, food, and mail, but also carrying inspectors, repair crews, and fresh keepers for rotation. Their arrival was, quite literally, a lifeline. Then, one day, there it is. Not a figment of your imagination, not a cloud bank playing tricks on your hopeful eyes, but the definite, unmistakable form of a ship. Your heart gives a little lurch. It's an almost overwhelming feeling. A cocktail of excitement, relief, and a strange, sudden shyness at the prospect of actual human interaction. You watch it draw closer. A sturdy, purposeful vessel. Probably not elegant, but beautiful in its own way, because of what it represents. You might even tidy your small quarters with a sudden, uncharacteristic burst of energy, as if preparing for esteemed guests, though the crew of the tender are more likely to be focused on the practicalities of their hazardous job than the neatness of your sock drawer. The arrival itself is often a tricky, even dangerous operation, especially if your tower is offshore. There's no comfortable dock or sheltered harbor here. The tender will anchor as close as it dares, and the transfer of goods and personnel is usually done by a smaller, more nimble longboat or launch, skillfully maneuvered through choppy seas and treacherous currents to the base of your tower. If there's a heavy swell running, this can be a white-knuckle affair. Barrels of oil, sacks of flour, crates of tinned goods, all have to be carefully hoisted up to your landing stage or directly into the tower, often using a winch or crane attached to the lighthouse itself. You're out there, of course, assisting, shouting instructions over the wind and waves, your muscles straining, your mind abuzz. It's a flurry of activity, a stark contrast to the usual monastic quiet. You might even crack a joke with one of the boatmen, a rusty, awkward attempt at social interaction after weeks or months of silence. They'll probably just grunt, being more concerned with not getting dashed against the rocks, which is fair enough. And then, the treasures. Not gold or jewels, but things far more precious in your current existence. Sacks of fresher provisions, perhaps some potatoes, onions, maybe even a rare, miraculous apple. More barrels of lamp oil, the currency of your profession. And, most eagerly anticipated of all, the mailbag. Letters from home, from loved ones, from a world that has continued to spin without you. Newspapers, however out of date they may be, offering glimpses of distant events, politics, and the lives of other people. One quirky tidbit, often noted by lighthouse historians, is the immense value placed on these old newspapers. Keepers would devour every word, advertisements and all, sometimes sharing them with the next keeper if they were being relieved, until the paper practically disintegrated. It was a window, however smudged, back to civilization. The crew of the tender might not stay long. They have other lights to service, a schedule to keep. There might be a gruff but not unfriendly exchange of news. Heard anything about the war in the Crimea then? Or, Old Man Finnegan down at the Cape Light finally retired, did he? You listen avidly, soaking up every word, every unfamiliar voice. Sometimes an inspector might come aboard your tower, a stern individual in a smart uniform, to check your logbooks, the state of the lamp, and your general upkeep. This adds a frisson of official scrutiny to the visit, a reminder that your solitary vigil is part of a larger, organized service. Historians sometimes debate how stringent these inspections truly were and how much a keeper's word about conditions or incidents was taken at face value, given the difficulty of independent verification in such isolated posts. For a few brief hours, your tower is a hive of activity, filled with the sounds of unfamiliar voices, the thud of supplies being landed, the general cheerful chaos of human endeavor. It's a reminder that you are not, in fact, the last man on earth, even if it often feels that way. But all too soon, the last barrel is hoisted, the last instruction given, the mailbag exchanged. The boatmen clamber back into their launch, a final wave, and the tender prepares to depart. You watch it go, a slowly diminishing shape on the vast ocean, taking with it that brief, precious connection to the wider world. The silence that descends in its wake is different from before. It's heavier somehow, tinged with the fresh memory of contact. Your new supplies sit around you, a tangible reminder of the visit, but the human presence is gone. You're alone again, but perhaps not quite so alone in spirit, with letters to read, news to ponder, and the knowledge that someone, somewhere, knows you're here and will eventually come again. The cycle of anticipation begins anew, but for now, you have the bounty of the tender to sustain you, in body and in mind. The flurry of excitement from the supply tender's visit has subsided, leaving behind a tower restocked with the essentials and your mind buzzing with fresh news and thoughts from the letters you devoured. The initial loneliness after the ship's departure has softened into a renewed sense of purpose, buoyed by the tangible connection to the outside world. Your routine reasserts itself, but perhaps with a lighter step, a less heavy heart. And part of that routine, one of the most crucial and, in its own way, most awe-inspiring, is the daily care of the lantern's optical heart. If your lighthouse is a particularly important one, or built or refitted in the mid to late 19th century, you are not just tending a simple lamp behind some panes of glass. You are the custodian of a scientific marvel, the Fresnel lens. If you've ever seen one up close, perhaps in a maritime museum, you'll know it's a thing of breathtaking beauty and ingenious complexity. It's not a single piece of curved glass like a magnifying lens, but an intricate assembly of precisely ground and polished glass prisms, arranged in concentric rings, often resembling a giant, multifaceted beehive or a colossal, crystalline jewel. This, the mainstream historical fact, is the revolutionary invention of French physicist Augustin Jean Fresnel in the 1820s. His dioptric system, using refraction rather than reflection, was able to capture and concentrate a far greater proportion of a lamp's light into a powerful horizontal beam, dramatically increasing the range and visibility of lighthouses. They came in different orders, from the massive first-order lenses used in major coastal lights, which could be over 8 feet tall and contain hundreds of individual prisms, down to smaller sixth-order lenses for harbor lights. Your daily cleaning routine, which we touched upon earlier in the context of the lamp chimney and lantern room windows, takes on a whole new level of reverence and meticulousness when it comes to the Fresnel lens. Each individual prism, every precisely angled piece of glass must be kept immaculately clean. A speck of dust, a greasy fingerprint, a film of salt haze can scatter or absorb the precious light, diminishing the beam's intensity and reach. And with a piece of equipment this expensive and vital, a single large Fresnel lens could cost as much as a small ship. You treat it with the gentle deference usually reserved for crown jewels or a particularly temperamental opera singer. No aggressive scrubbing here, thank you very much. You approach the lens armed with your softest chamois cloths, perhaps a feather duster for the most delicate preliminary work, and a cleaning solution approved by the Lighthouse Board, often a dilute solution of spirits of wine or specially prepared rouge powder for polishing. One quirky but essential practice for many keepers tending these magnificent lenses was to wear soft slippers or even go barefoot inside the lantern room. This was to prevent any grit or dirt from their boots being tracked in and potentially scratching the prisms or the carefully polished floor of the lantern room, which often had its own reflective properties. Imagine trying to explain to the inspector that you'd accidentally gouged a priceless, irreplaceable prism because you couldn't be bothered to take off your muddy boots. The paperwork alone would be a nightmare. Reason for lens damage. Keeper performed impromptu tap dance routine. Regrets. You start at the top, working your way down, section by section, prism by prism. The larger central bullseye lens, the catadioptric rings above and below that capture and redirect light from the upper and lower angles, each segment receives your full attention. It's a slow, almost meditative process. You breathe lightly, careful not to fog the glass you've just polished. You develop an intimate knowledge of every curve, every facet, every junction of brass and glass. You learn to see the subtle play of light through the prisms even when the lamp is unlit, the way the daylight refracts into tiny rainbows on the lantern room floor. It's like being the personal valet to a silent, luminous celebrity. Historians still sometimes debate the practical challenges faced by keepers in maintaining these complex optical systems in often harsh and remote environments. While the scientific principles were sound, the reality of keeping hundreds of delicate glass components perfectly aligned and spotless, with limited tools and in all weathers, must have been a constant source of pressure. Were there regional variations in cleaning techniques or specialized tools developed by keepers themselves that never made it into the official manuals? As you clean, you can't help but marvel at the ingenuity of it. This isn't just a big piece of glass, it's applied physics, a testament to human understanding of light and optics. Each prism is angled with mathematical precision to bend the light from the central lamp, to gather every errant ray and marshal it into that single, piercing beam that will guide ships safely to harbor or warn them away from treacherous reefs. You are, in a very real sense, polishing the very cutting edge of 19th century technology. It makes the simple act of wiping down a surface feel incredibly important. You're not just cleaning, you're enabling science to perform its life-saving duty. The lens assembly often rotates, as we've discussed, to create that characteristic flashing pattern. The massive structure of glass and brass, sometimes weighing several tons, might float in a mercury bath to reduce friction and allow for smooth, almost effortless rotation by the clockwork mechanism. Cleaning around this mercury trough, if your lens has one, is another delicate operation, as mercury is, shall we say, not exactly health spa material. So you exercise caution, you follow the procedures, you treat this magnificent, dangerous, beautiful machine with the respect it demands. When your work is done and the lamp is lit once more as dusk falls, the effect of the Fresnel lens is truly magical. The light isn't just a diffuse glow, it's a focused, brilliant spear, slicing through the darkness with an intensity that simpler lamps and reflectors could never achieve. As it sweeps its appointed path across the sea, you feel a profound sense of satisfaction, of connection to the genius of its inventor and to the countless mariners whose lives depend on its unwavering performance. You are not just a keeper of a flame, but a guardian of the light, magnified and made mighty by this wondrous cage of glass. The magnificent Fresnel lens, now gleaming under your meticulous care, stands ready for another night's service, a silent testament to human ingenuity. But your world, keeper, isn't confined solely to the cold stone of the tower and the intricate brass and glass of its machinery. Step out onto that narrow gallery encircling the lantern room. Carefully, mind you, especially if the wind is feeling boisterous, or gaze from one of your small, deeply set windows, and you're presented with a constant, ever-changing panorama of the natural world. Your closest neighbors, and indeed your most frequent visitors, are not human. They are the creatures of the sea and sky. Seabirds are your constant companions, a swirling, screeching, endlessly fascinating aerial ballet. Gulls, of course, are ubiquitous. Their raucous cries a familiar soundtrack to your days. You learn to distinguish their different calls: the sharp bark of alarm, the mewling complaint, the almost laugh-like chatter as they squabble over some unseen morsel on the waves. They wheel and glide on the updrafts created by the tower itself, sometimes seeming to hover just outside your window, fixing you with a bold, unblinking stare as if to ask what you're looking at. You might even develop a grudging sort of affection for them, despite their tendency to redecorate the lantern glass with their, shall we say, artistic expressions. You could try naming them, but let's be honest. That annoying one that always poops on the north window is probably as affectionate as it gets. Depending on your location, you might see terns, elegant and swift, diving like arrows into the water to snatch small fish. Cormorants, dark and reptilian, might perch on nearby rocks, drying their wings in the sun. Guillemots and razorbills, looking like miniature seafaring penguins, could be bobbing in the waves below. The mainstream historical fact here is that lighthouses, particularly those with powerful, steady lights, before rotating mechanisms became universal, could tragically become hazards for migrating birds, especially on foggy or stormy nights. Disoriented birds would fly towards the intense beam, sometimes colliding with the lantern glass in large numbers, a distressing event for many keepers who often had to clear away the fallen creatures in the morning. This led to various studies and eventually modifications to try and reduce bird strikes, a concern that continues with tall, illuminated structures even today. Beyond the birds, the sea itself is a source of endless observation. On calmer days, you might spot the sleek, dark head of a seal popping up to investigate your stony outcrop, its large liquid eyes regarding you with a placid curiosity before it dives again with a flick of its powerful tail. If your lighthouse is on a major migration route, you could be treated to the truly breathtaking spectacle of whales passing by. Perhaps the spout of a humpback, a distant plume of mist against the horizon, or even the immense, dark bulk of a right whale surfacing for air. These are moments of pure magic, a reminder of the incredible life teeming in the waters you guard. You'd certainly note such a significant sighting in your logbook. Imagine trying to describe a whale to someone who's only ever seen a cow. It's like a cow, but it's the size of your entire village and it swims. Also, it doesn't moo mostly. Fishing, for some keepers at stations with accessible rocks or a bit of sheltered water, might be both a pastime and a welcome supplement to the monotonous diet of salted meat and hardtack. The thrill of a tug on the line, the struggle to land a fresh cod or pollock, would be a welcome break in the routine and a rare taste of something not preserved in a barrel of brine. But the ocean is also a place of mystery, and the 19th century was an era when the deepest abysses were still largely unknown, fertile ground for imagination and superstition. While you're a practical person, a tender of lamps and machinery, the long solitary hours, the strange sounds of the sea, the vast, dark expanse visible from your tower at night, these can't help but stir the imagination. Sailors were full of tales of krakens, giant sea serpents, and other monstrous denizens of the deep. One quirky tidbit is that occasionally, lighthouse keepers themselves would report seeing inexplicable things, unusual wave patterns, strange lights beneath the water, or fleeting glimpses of enormous, unidentifiable creatures. Were these genuine observations of unknown species, tricks of the light and tired eyes, or perhaps the product of profound isolation and an overactive imagination fueled by sailors' yarns? Historians still engage in scholarly debate about how to interpret such anecdotal accounts from this period. While most were likely misinterpretations of known phenomena like whale pods, basking sharks, or large squid, the allure of the unknown monster persisted. You might find yourself, during a quiet night watch, staring out into the inky blackness beyond the sweep of your lamp, wondering what truly lies beneath those restless waves. Are there really creatures down there that defy human understanding? The sea can play tricks. A floating log encrusted with barnacles can, in the right light, take on a sinister, serpentine form. A mass of seaweed can undulate like something alive. The groan of the tide in a hidden sea cave can sound like the sigh of some colossal sleeping beast. It's easy to let your mind wander, to populate the unseen depths with phantoms and marvels. After all, if no one's around to tell you that your Leviathan was probably just a very enthusiastic group of porpoises, who's to say? Your relationship with the wildlife is mostly one of distant observation. You are the silent watcher, they are the wild, untamed inhabitants of this elemental world. They offer no companionship in the human sense, but their presence is a constant reminder that life, in its myriad forms, endures even in the harshest environments. They are a part of the rhythm of your station, as much as the tides and the wind. And sometimes, on a clear day, seeing a distant flock of birds purposefully making its way across the sky, or the powerful arching leap of a dolphin, can bring a fleeting sense of connection to the wider, wilder world beyond your solitary stone tower. The days at your isolated tower mostly unfold with a predictable, if lonely, rhythm. You watch the gulls. You polish the lens. You listen to the sea's endless repertoire of sighs and roars. It's a life measured in lamp oil consumed and wicks trimmed. But every now and then, something happens that shatters the monotony. Something that yanks you out of your quiet reverie and reminds you that the vast ocean you guard is a stage for dramas both natural and human, dramas that can unfold with terrifying speed. Perhaps it begins subtly. You're scanning the horizon during your daylight watch, a habit so ingrained it's almost unconscious, and you spot a vessel that just doesn't look right. It might be a sailing ship with its canvas in disarray, listing awkwardly, or a steamer trailing an unusual plume of smoke, or perhaps making no headway at all despite a fair wind. Your heart quickens. This isn't the confident passage of a well-sailed ship. This has the hallmarks of trouble. As it draws closer, or as you train your telescope, a vital piece of your equipment, upon it, you might see the recognized maritime distress signals of the 19th century. This is a crucial historical fact. Mariners had established ways to cry for help, such as hoisting specific flags in a particular order, like the NC flags for "I am in distress" and "require immediate assistance," firing guns at intervals, or, if at night, launching flares or rockets. Seeing such signals from your lonely tower is a moment of intense, complicated emotion. There's the immediate surge of concern, the professional focus. Is your light performing optimally? Is there anything you can do? But there's also a profound sense of helplessness. In most cases, particularly in a wave-swept tower far from shore, direct intervention is impossible. You have no swift rescue vessel at your command, no radio to summon aid, that's still a few decades in the future for widespread use. Your primary duty is to your own light, ensuring it functions perfectly to guide other vessels away from danger, and to meticulously log the event, the ship's description, its apparent distress, its course, the time. This logbook entry might be the only record, the only testament to a vessel's struggle. You're a witness, a solitary, powerless observer to a potential tragedy unfolding on your watch. It's a heavy burden. You'd scan the seas for any sign of a rescue attempt by another passing ship, hoping against hope. Sometimes the unexpected sight is less about human drama and more about the grandeur of the natural world putting on a special performance. You might be on your night watch, the great lamp blazing, when the sky above begins to shimmer and dance with an ethereal light. If your lighthouse is situated at a high enough latitude, you could be blessed with a display of the aurora borealis or australis, curtains of green, pink, and violet light rippling across the heavens. It's a sight so otherworldly, so breathtakingly beautiful, it makes your stone tower feel like a front row seat to the universe's own celestial ballet. Or perhaps a meteor shower, with streaks of silver fire raining down through the darkness, each one a fleeting wish across the velvet sky. These moments are gifts, reminders of a cosmos far vaster and more mysterious than your small, lamplit world. You'd certainly make a note of such an event in your log, perhaps with less scientific detachment than usual. Sky went bonkers tonight. Rather pretty. Lamp fine. Then there are the unusual sounds. The tower, as you know, has its own symphony of groans and whistles. But sometimes, a sound comes from the outside that you can't quite place. A strange, mournful cry carried on the wind that isn't a gull or a seal. A deep, resonant boom from the distance that isn't thunder or a foghorn you recognize. One quirky tidbit that surfaces in lighthouse lore is the occasional report of phantom sounds, unexplained noises that keepers swore they heard. Were they the echoes of distant, unseen shipwrecks, the cries of legendary sea creatures, or simply the wind playing tricks in the complex acoustics of a stone tower by the sea? Historians and folklorists often debate the origins of such tales, weighing the psychological effects of isolation against the possibility of genuinely unidentifiable, natural or man-made sounds. You, alone in your tower, hearing something utterly alien, might find the hairs on the back of your neck prickling, your rational mind battling with a more primitive unease. Probably just a very large, very lost walrus having a bit of a sing-song. Probably. And let's not forget the truly exceptional wildlife sightings, beyond the usual gulls and seals. The unusual whale sighting mentioned in our outline could be more than just a standard pod passing by. Perhaps it's an incredibly rare species, or a whale behaving in a peculiar way, or an encounter so close to your tower that you can hear its immense breathing, see the barnacles on its ancient skin. These are the stories that would be told and retold, perhaps embellished a little with each telling whenever keepers gathered. Saw a whale today. Big as a supply tender. Waved its fin at me. Pretty sure it winked. The line between sober observation and a good yarn could blur, especially when you've only got the sea spray for company. These unexpected sights and sounds, whether alarming or awe-inspiring, serve a crucial purpose. They break the spell of routine. They remind you that your vigil is not just a passive waiting game, but that you are stationed on the very edge of a dynamic, unpredictable world. Each strange light, each unidentified cry, each vessel in peril, sharpens your senses, heightens your awareness, and underscores the vital importance of the steady, reliable beam you send out into the vast, often perilous, unknown. After the adrenaline of spotting a ship in distress, or the sheer wonder of a celestial light show, or even just the mild confusion of hearing a sound that defies easy explanation, there comes the inevitable duty of documentation. Your experiences, your observations, the very pulse of your isolated station, all must be translated into neat, methodical entries in the official Lighthouse logbook. This hefty, leather-bound volume is your tower's memory, its official history, and a testament to your diligence. It's probably not going to be a bestseller unless someone has a very specific kink for 19th century weather patterns and the thrilling minutiae of lamp oil consumption. This isn't a personal diary for your innermost thoughts and existential musings on the nature of solitude and seagulls. though a bit of your personality might inadvertently seep into the margins. No, the logbook is a formal record, a requirement of the lighthouse service. The mainstream historical fact here is that meticulous log keeping was a non-negotiable part of a lighthouse keeper's duties. These logs provided a continuous record of the light's operation, weather conditions, passing maritime traffic, supplies consumed, like oil and wicks, any maintenance performed, and, crucially, any unusual occurrences, like those ships in distress, storm damage, or that particularly spectacular meteor shower we just imagined. These records were periodically inspected and formed an invaluable archive for the lighthouse authorities, aiding in everything from scheduling resupply to understanding long-term coastal conditions. So, at regular intervals, perhaps at the end of each watch or at a set time each day, you sit down at your sturdy table, the great logbook open before you. You dip your pen, likely a steel-nibbed dip pen, into the ink pot, the scratch of it on the thick, slightly rough paper one of the few man-made sounds in your quiet world. The entries must be clear, concise, and accurate. 0800 hours, wind WSW, force 4, sea moderate, sky overcast with intermittent drizzle, barometer 29.8 inches and falling, sighted three-masted bark, name illegible, heading east, lamp extinguished as per regulations at sunrise, commence cleaning of lantern glass and brass. Riveting stuff, I know. You can just feel the future historians getting all hot and bothered. You record the mundane alongside the potentially momentous. The amount of oil consumed during the night's burn, the number of wicks trimmed, whether the clockwork mechanism for a rotating light was wound and is functioning correctly. If you had to operate the foghorn, as we did in our rather deafening imaginary shift, you'd note the time it was started, the duration of its operation, and when the fog finally cleared. These details might seem trivial, but they build a picture of the station's operational life and its demands on resources and on you. Think of it as your 19th century Fitbit report, but instead of steps, it's barrels of oil used, and hours spent wishing the fog would just give it a rest. But amongst the routine entries, there's space for the notable occurrences. This is where those unexpected sights and sounds get their official mention. That ship displaying distress signals? Its description, course, the signals observed, and the time, all meticulously recorded. The ferocity of that storm, wind direction and estimated force, damage to the tower, even minor leaks or loose fittings, wave height if you can judge it. These are vital data. One quirky tidbit often found when perusing old lighthouse logbooks is the occasional injection of dry wit or understated commentary that slips past the officialese. A keeper might record a particularly persistent seagull as unidentified avian inspector conducting daily window cleanliness assessment, apparently unimpressed. Or, after a visit from a notoriously difficult official, an entry might simply read, Inspector Henderson departed. Tower still standing. It's these little flashes of humanity that make the logs more than just dry data. Historians and researchers often debate the level of subjectivity in these official records. While keepers were instructed to be objective, their descriptions of weather, sea state, or even the behavior of ships could be influenced by their individual experience, perception, and perhaps even their current mood. Was strong gale the same for a seasoned keeper as it was for a novice? How accurately could one estimate visibility in fog before standardized instruments were common? These questions add a layer of complexity to interpreting these historical documents, but they don't diminish their value. You also note the passing ships, their type, their flag if discernible, their course. This information helped build a picture of maritime trade routes and activity. If a ship passed unusually close, or seemed to be navigating erratically, even if not in overt distress, you'd make a note of that too. You are, in essence, a maritime traffic controller, albeit one with very limited means of communication and a very specific, repetitive instruction. Don't hit the big pointy rocks I live next to. Filling in the logbook is a moment of quiet reflection, a way to process the events of your watch. It grounds you, connects your solitary actions to the larger framework of the lighthouse service. There's a certain satisfaction in seeing the pages fill up, a tangible record of your diligence and the tower's steadfast service. It's your small contribution to a much larger story, the story of humanity's centuries-long effort to make the seas safer. And who knows, perhaps one day, long after you and your lamp have faded into history, someone will carefully turn these pages, decipher your spidery handwriting, and get a fleeting glimpse into the quiet, lonely, and sometimes surprisingly eventful routine of a 19th-century lighthouse keeper. Hopefully, they'll appreciate your consistent use of the Oxford comma. One can only hope. The pages of your logbook fill, day by meticulous day, entry by careful entry. The ink records the minutiae of your watch, the wind's direction, the lamp's steady flame, the passing of nameless ships. And as you turn these pages, or simply live through the slow procession of weeks and months, another grander rhythm makes itself known, the turning of the seasons. Here, in your isolated stone tower, you are a privileged, if somewhat captive audience to the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, transformations that mark the year's slow passage. It's not like living on land, where the bloom of flowers or the fall of leaves shouts the changing seasons. Here the cues are more nuanced, read in the language of the sea and sky. Winter arrives not with a gentle snowfall dusting a picturesque landscape, though in some northerly lighthouse locations, snow and ice are very much a brutal reality. For you, perhaps, it announces itself with a sharpening of the wind, a wind that carries a deeper, more penetrating chill, making the damp stone of your tower feel like it's actively leaching warmth from your very bones. The days grow noticeably shorter, which means your primary companion, the great lamp, demands your attention for longer stretches. The mainstream historical fact is that the winter months meant significantly increased lamp oil consumption and longer hours of vigilance for keepers, as darkness reigned for a greater portion of each 24-hour cycle. The sun, when it bothers to show up, is a pale, distant acquaintance, low on the horizon, offering little warmth and even less cheer. It's like the sun's on a very limited contract during winter, only showing up for the bare minimum of its contractual obligations. The sea itself changes character in winter. It often takes on a harder, steely gray or a turbulent, inky blue, its waves more consistently powerful, its storms more frequent and possessing a raw, savage fury. Those gales we talked about, they seem to have a particular venom in the winter months. You become intimately familiar with the different sounds of winter waves, the deep, guttural roar of a proper tempest, the sharp, cracking sound of water exploding against the granite, different from the more rhythmic sighs of summer swells. There's a sense of the world being stripped back to its bare, elemental essentials: wind, water, rock, and your tiny, defiant light. Then, ever so slowly, a shift. The days, almost imperceptibly at first, begin to lengthen. A subtle change in the quality of the light, perhaps a touch more warmth than the midday sun when it graces you with its presence. Spring doesn't burst forth here with a riot of daffodils and cherry blossoms. Instead, it might be heralded by a change in the migratory bird patterns, new arrivals, different calls echoing around the tower. The sea might lose some of its winter harshness, the gales becoming less frequent, interspersed with periods of surprising calm. You might even dare to open a window for a little longer, to let in air that feels less like an icy slap and more like a cool, damp handshake. The never-ending task of battling mildew might ease, just a fraction. One quirky tidbit from some lighthouse lore involves keepers marking the official start of their personal spring, not by a calendar date, but by the first sighting of a particular seabird returning, or the day they could finally dry their socks properly outside on the gallery without them instantly freezing solid or blowing away to Norway. Summer, when it arrives, is a gentler time, relatively speaking. The sun climbs higher, stays longer, and the sea can sometimes take on an almost benign, sparkling demeanor. This is when fog banks might become more of a prevalent issue in some regions, replacing the violent storms of winter with a different kind of challenge, that thick, silent, visibility-stealing menace we've already wrestled with. The hours of darkness are shorter, meaning less oil consumed, and perhaps, just perhaps, a fraction more time for your own pursuits, or even for sleep that isn't quite so heavily laden with the responsibility of an all-night vigil. You might see more recreational sailing craft in the distance, a reminder of a world where people actually go out on the water for fun, a concept that might seem delightfully alien from your professional, often perilous perch. Look, Agnes, a tiny boat full of people not actively fearing for their lives. How quaint. And then autumn, with its own particular beauty and melancholy. The light begins to take on that golden, slanted quality. The first of the winter gales might start to test the waters, a reminder of what's to come. Migratory birds gather, preparing for their long journeys. The sea can be particularly dramatic in autumn, with big, powerful swells under skies that shift from brilliant blue to stormy purple in the space of an afternoon. There's a sense of preparation, of the natural world battening down its hatches, and you in your tower do the same, ensuring your supplies of oil and provisions are adequate for the longer, darker nights ahead. Through all these seasonal shifts, your tower endures. It stands against the winter gales, bakes, as much as damp stone can bake, in the summer sun, and withstands the relentless salt spray year after year, and you endure with it. You become a keen observer of these subtle meteorological and natural cues. Your logbook entries reflect these changes. First frost observed on gallery railings. Large flock of gannets passed south today. Sea calm enough to see bottom near kelp beds. Historians and climatologists sometimes debate how consistently and accurately these isolated, often non-scientifically trained keepers could record and interpret long-term weather patterns or subtle ecological shifts, but their logs nonetheless provide fascinating glimpses. You are not just living in this environment. You become a part of its rhythm, your life a small, human echo of the grand, cyclical dance of the seasons. Each completed cycle is a quiet victory, a testament to your resilience and the enduring strength of your lonely stone sentinel. The seasons have turned perhaps more than once since you first stepped onto this isolated knuckle of rock and took possession of its tall, stoic tower. Your logbook is fatter with entries, your knowledge of the sea's moods and the sky's intentions as deep and ingrained as the lines etched around your own eyes from squinting at distant horizons. You've endured storms that felt like the end of the world, basked in the brief, deceptive warmth of summer suns, and listened to the mournful cries of countless gulls who, despite your best efforts, still haven't learned any decent conversation starters. The routine has become you, and you it. The polishing, the fueling, the winding, the watching. It's the very rhythm of your blood. And then, one ordinary day, much like the day the supply tender arrived, but this time carrying a different, more profound significance, you see it. A smudge on the vast, indifferent canvas of the ocean. Your heart, a practiced, steady muscle, gives an uncharacteristic little flutter. You raise your telescope, your hand surprisingly steady, and focus. Yes, it's not a mirage, not a strangely shaped cloud, not a particularly ambitious flock of seabirds flying in tight formation. It's a ship, and from its familiar lines, its purposeful approach, This is not just bringing oil and hardtack. This one is bringing your replacement. This one is bringing an end. For now, the mainstream historical fact is that lighthouse keepers, especially at isolated stations, serve tours of duty that could vary enormously. For some, it might be a matter of months. For others, particularly in the most remote or undesirable locations, it could stretch to a year or even longer, often extended by the caprice of weather delaying the relief vessel. The arrival of that relief ship was, therefore, an event of monumental personal importance, signaling a return to the world of men, of chatter, of relative comfort. As the vessel draws nearer, a strange mixture of emotions might swirl within you. Relief, undeniably. The thought of soft beds, fresh food that doesn't taste vaguely of brine and existential dread, conversations that involve more than one participant. These are powerful lures, but perhaps there's also a surprising, subtle thread of reluctance. This stark tower, this demanding lamp, this wild, lonely seascape, it has been your entire world. You've poured your energy, your focus, your very self into its upkeep. Leaving it feels, in a small way, like leaving a part of yourself behind. You might find yourself giving the brasswork an extra, unnecessary polish, or checking the alignment of a prism one last time, a fussy, almost parental concern. Don't you let that new fellow mess up your parallax now? The handover process, when the relief boat finally makes its precarious landing and your successor steps ashore, is both formal and deeply personal. There's the official business. You walk the new keeper through the lamp's operation, the clockwork's quirks, the foghorn's tantrums. You present the meticulously kept logbook, the record of your stewardship. You account for the stores of oil, wicks, and provisions. Every item is checked, every procedure explained. It's a transfer of responsibility, a passing of the torch, or in this case, the very, very large oil lamp. One quirky tidbit from lighthouse history is the unwritten code and occasional idiosyncratic traditions between outgoing and incoming keepers. Some outgoing keepers would leave everything in absolutely pristine, almost neurotically perfect condition, perhaps even a small, welcoming gift like a carved trinket or a particularly good stash of tea saved for the occasion. Others, perhaps if their relief had been unduly delayed, or if they were just feeling a bit salty, pun intended, might leave a more challenging environment. A slightly troublesome burner, a clockwork mechanism known to stick if not handled just so. Nothing to endanger the light, of course, but a subtle, "Welcome to my world, pal," message. Historians often debate the extent to which these personal dynamics influence the smooth operation of the service, far from the direct oversight of the authorities. You show your replacement where you've stored the emergency rations, how to coax the best flame from the stove on a damp morning, which window rattles the most in a southerly gale. You share the little bits of local knowledge that aren't in any manual. The best spot to watch for seals, the particular way the tide rips around the western rocks, the fact that the third step on the spiral stair always creaks, no matter what you do. It's a download of lived experience, a condensed apprenticeship. Then, it's time to gather your own few well-worn belongings. Your sea chest, which seemed so full when you arrived, now holds the same clothes, a few more books perhaps, and the invisible weight of months or years of solitude and vigilance. You take one last look around the small, circular living space that has been your universe. The stone walls, the narrow bunk, the sturdy table. It looks stark, empty, waiting for a new presence to imprint itself. One last climb to the lantern room, a final glance at the magnificent lens, silent and gleaming in the daylight, awaiting another's hand to bring it to life. As you descend the tower for the last time, for this tour anyway, and step into the boat that will carry you away, there's a profound sense of transition. You're leaving the rhythm of the light, the sea, the seasons, and returning to the more chaotic, unpredictable rhythm of human society. The journey back to shore, to land, to people, will be a strange decompression. The world will seem too loud, too fast, too crowded. But that's a challenge for later. For now, as the boat pulls away and you look back at the tower, a solitary sentinel shrinking against the vastness of the sea, there's a quiet sense of a job well done. The light is in new hands, the vigil continues, and you, keeper, are going home. And so, Your time in the lonely tower draws to a close, the image of that steadfast stone sentinel, with its faithful sweeping beam, beginning to soften at the edges of your awareness. The rhythmic crash of waves against the rocks, the mournful cry of the gulls, the wind's ceaseless song around the lantern glass. All these sounds begin to recede, replaced by a deeper, more encompassing quiet. The weight of responsibility for the light, for the unseen ships navigating by its grace, now lifts from your shoulders, allowing them to gently relax. You feel the last vestiges of the salt spray on your skin, the memory of the cold, damp stone, the phantom sensation of the polished brass beneath your fingertips. But these too are fading, becoming less distinct, like a dream upon waking. The intense focus required for your duties gives way to a softer, more diffuse attention, as your mind drifts away from the stark realities of that isolated life towards a place of rest and gentle ease. The vast, dark ocean, once a source of constant vigilance and occasional trepidation, now becomes a soothing, limitless expanse, its surface smoothed by the distance of memory, its depths holding no immediate concern. The light itself, that powerful, meticulously tended beam, now merges with the countless other lights of your imagination, a comforting glow that promises only peace. Let the image of the tower stand as a distant, reassuring presence, a symbol of steadfastness and quiet strength, while you yourself drift further and further into the calm, untroubled waters of deep, restorative sleep. There are no more wicks to trim, no more storms to endure, no more lonely hours to fill. Only peace, only quiet, only the gentle embrace of slumber. End of script. Sweet dreams. You run a hand along the cold, curved wall. It feels ancient, even if it was only built a few decades prior. There's a palpable sense of responsibility settling onto your shoulders, as heavy as the damp air. Up above, unseen for now, is the lantern room, the heart of the tower, the reason for its existence and yours. That is where the magic and the relentless work happens. For now, though, you must take stock of your new domain. You check the seals on the windows, the state of the stovepipe, the inventory of basic supplies left by the departing keeper. A half-filled barrel of lamp oil, a sack of flour, some salted meat. It's not exactly a gourmet setup. You won't be hosting any dinner parties here unless your guests are particularly stoic seabirds with a penchant for hardtack. One rather quirky, though essential item you'd find in many 19th-century lighthouse supply lists was an abundance of polishing paste and soft cloths, not just for the lens, but for every piece of brass in the clockwork mechanism and lantern, as tarnish could impede function, and heaven forbid, the light itself. The gleam of polished metal was a point of pride, and a sign of a well-kept station. The silence, once the boat has departed and its sounds have faded into the vastness of the ocean, is profound. It's a silence punctuated only by the natural world, the rhythmic sigh and crash of waves against the base of the tower, the mournful cry of a distant gull, the whisper of wind finding its way through some unseen crevice in the stone. This will be the soundtrack to your life for the foreseeable future. Your small trunk of belongings looks almost comically out of place in this stark, circular chamber. It represents your entire connection to the world you've left behind. You take a deep breath. The air is undeniably fresh, clean in a way city air never is, but it carries that constant underlying chill. Your first task, even before unpacking, will be to lay a fire, to try and push back the damp and stake your claim on this stone sentinel. The true work, the tending of the light, will begin as dusk approaches. For now, you are alone with the stone, the sea, and the sky. Welcome home, keeper. The fire in your small stove is now crackling with a hesitant cheer, a small pocket of warmth in the vast coolness of the tower. It doesn't do much to dispel the underlying damp, not yet anyway, but it's a start, a small domestic flag planted in this wild outpost. You've made a cursory attempt to arrange your few belongings, creating a semblance of order that feels more symbolic than practical. But as the light outside begins to fade, that watery blue sky now streaked with the bruised purples and soft oranges of impending twilight, a different kind of imperative takes hold. It's time to ascend. Time to meet the real master of this tower, the light itself. You make your way to the spiral staircase, usually a tight, winding affair made of cast iron or stone, each step worn smooth by the countless ascents and descents of your predecessors. The climb is surprisingly strenuous, especially as you'll be carrying supplies on many future trips. Remember that grand, sweeping staircase in the movies? Not here, pal. This is more like climbing up the inside of a giant, slightly claustrophobic drainpipe, if drainpipes had a tendency to echo every footfall with a mournful clang. With each upward turn, the windows offer fleeting, segmented glimpses of the darkening seascape, a reminder of the vastness you're here to serve. Finally, you reach the service room, just below the lantern gallery. This is the lamp's engine room. It's backstage, filled with the tools of your trade, spare wicks coiled like pale snakes, polishing cloths, cans of oil, funnels, trimming scissors, and perhaps a small workbench for minor repairs. The air up here is even more distinctly tinged with the smell of lamp oil. In the mid-19th century, this might have been colza oil, derived from rapeseed, or perhaps the much-prized sperm whale oil, known for its bright, clean flame. Later in the century, mineral oil, or kerosene, would become more common, being cheaper and more readily available, though each fuel had its own particular demands, and, shall we say, olfactory signature. You wouldn't want to spill sperm oil on your Sunday best, assuming you had a Sunday best out here, or, indeed, a Sunday. You take a moment, gathering your thoughts and the necessary implements. This isn't just flipping a switch. This is a ritual, a careful practice sequence that must be performed flawlessly every single evening. The safety of countless unknown mariners depends on it. No pressure then. Just the potential for maritime disaster resting squarely on your ability to light a very, very big candle.